Amen. All right. For the last couple of weeks, we've kind of just listened as Jesus spoke, haven't we? There's not really been any action. Jesus has just sat in a boat and he's spoken to people on the shore. And he's taught us lots of things. He's taught us things about his kingdom. He's taught us about how his kingdom is going to grow by the simple spread of his word. He's told us that his kingdom is going to start really small. He's told us that his kingdom is going to look weak. He's told us that his kingdom coming is going to take time. And as you've listened for 2 weeks, you might have been tempted to be lulled into thinking that in this man who's just speaking about things that are small and weak and slow, the one who's speaking is kind of small. Just a teacher, just a guy in a boat, not doing anything particularly fancy, just speaking, which is kind of fine while you're sat in the safety of the shore, isn't it? But what about when life kicks off and everything starts going wrong? What about when you are overwhelmed by everything and helpless in the face of what comes your way? What about when you are full of fear? Now, some of us like to think that we're not afraid of anything, don't we? It's not true, though, because fear it's part of being human. It's part of being someone who has been created and who isn't the creator. It's part of not being in control. It's part of life being unpredictable. There are things that can change our lives in an instant and over which we have absolutely no control. For some of us, our greatest fears have actually already been realized. Only then for those fears to be replaced by new fears. If you're watching the news this week, it's all been about the budget, isn't it? Which is thrilling. The budget this week has left some people worried about how they're going to pay their bills, whether they're still going to have a job next week. Some of us have been at doctor's appointments over the last couple of weeks, worried that the doctor might say the word that begins with C. Some of us live in fear of ourselves or our loved ones, slipping back into old habits and relapsing into addiction. Failure, the expectations of others, losing loved ones, losing your home, losing your mind. All kinds of dangers and disasters that we face in this world, all kinds of darkness and evil, all kinds of diseases we could catch, and above all else, the devastation and the destruction of death that waits for all of us. There's plenty of reasons to be fearful, that's the point. Plenty of reasons to be fearful in this world. And for big fears, a small Jesus will not cut it. So if the last couple of weeks has put a small view of Jesus into your mind, this morning is going to help correct your view, because we need a Jesus who is able to deal with our biggest fears, and therefore we need a Jesus who is bigger than anything else that we face. Mark presents us this morning in this passage with a Jesus who has supreme authority over anything and everything. A Jesus who is bigger. And so we're going to move quite quickly. We've got quite a big passage, and we're going to look at a Jesus who is bigger than danger and disaster. We're going to look at a Jesus who's bigger than demonic darkness. We're going to look at a Jesus who's bigger than the power of disease and even the power of death. And today, with a big Jesus set before our eyes, we have to grapple with this big implication for our lives, okay? Here it is. Jesus is the Lord who deserves your fear and demands your trust. That's it. That's the chairs. Hey, Natasha, good one. Jesus is the Lord who deserves your fear and demands your trust. So here we go. Mark chapter 4, verse 35. It's out of the safety of the classroom on the shore. We're heading out into the crucible of a terrifying storm. Verse 35. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Now, if you're taking notes, here's our first scene, if you like. Jesus is bigger than danger and disaster. He calms a great storm. It doesn't need a huge amount of explanation, this story, does it? It's an action-packed story about the wind and the waves. Jesus and his disciples, they go out on the Sea of Galilee. They're in the boat, and halfway across, verse 37, there's a windstorm that whips up. Now, remember, we've already seen where Jesus got his disciples from. Most of these guys are what? They're fishermen. So these are guys who have got their sea legs already. These are guys who are used to reading the weather around the Sea of Galilee. They've worked for years on this sea. They know how to handle a boat. But this storm came out of nowhere. And the waves are filling up the boat, and there's absolutely nothing that they can do. Now, sometimes we feel like we know what we're doing in life, don't we? And we feel kind of competent. And we feel like we are capable. And regardless of what comes our way, we think fairly resilient. And then out of nowhere, something we didn't expect. Something that we can do nothing about. And where is Jesus? Well, Jesus is in the back of the boat, asleep. I woke up early on Friday morning. I don't know if you heard it. There was the wind whipping against the side of the house. Anyone else wake up from the wind on Friday morning? Yeah. So my head instantly went, I hope the roof stays on from all of my tampering in the attic. Then it went, I hope the greenhouse stays where it is. And then it went, and I hope our new office can handle it. And the leaves kind of whipped against the side of the house, and I lay there just worried. Imagine being in a massive windstorm in a tiny little boat. And Jesus just sleeps. And the disciples wake him, Mark says, verse 38, which means the wind and the waves didn't wake him, but the disciples wake him, and they say, "Teacher, don't you care that we're perishing?" And I think here is a hint at where their head is at. Because they say, "Teacher," because what's he been doing? Teaching. What cannot help them right now? Mere teaching. And so what they can see really clearly is the fearful size of the storm. But what they question about him is his capability. Is he just a teacher who speaks? And also his care. Do you not care that we're perishing? And I wonder if you've ever asked those questions, and maybe you're asking those questions this morning. Is Jesus capable of dealing with my biggest fears? And does Jesus really care about me? And what Jesus does is he answers their question. Not directly, but he stands up in the boat and he gives the wind and the sea a telling, as if they're kind of naughty school kids. Peace, be still. And the wind stops. And the waves that ordinarily would have kept swirling for a few hours after the wind stops turn into like a mill pond on the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus demonstrates to his disciples his capability coupled with his care, which brings about great calm. Now, can you imagine being in this boat and freaking out in the middle of this storm? And Jesus is asleep in the back, and so you're kind of going, "Ah! Jesus! Do you not care that we're perishing?" And then all of a sudden, Jesus brings it to an end in an instant. You'd feel a wee bit silly, wouldn't you? Do you know when you're at a wedding and the music's so loud that you have to shout to be heard by the person next to you? And then the music ends and you're still shouting. Jesus calms it in an instant. The weathermen and women can't even predict what the weather's going to do accurately. And Jesus controls the elements like they're an Amazon Alexa. And then he asks the two key questions for this whole section. Why are you so afraid? Verse 40. Have you still no faith? And what happens is their fear of the great storm is replaced in verse 41 by a great fear of the one who stilled the storm. As they ask, well, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Now, Jesus' questions only make sense in light of the disciples' question. Because fear in the face of danger is understandable, isn't it? It's understandable. But Jesus calls for faith that doesn't fear disaster because of his greater power. And so the lesson of the wind and the waves is that when staring at seemingly unassailable danger, the calming of the storm teaches us in the middle of mayhem we are meant to trust Jesus. When the storm that we can see is fearfully great, what we need is a storm stiller who is fearfully greater. That's easy to say in the safety of the shore as we speak and teach. And though we would generally prefer, if we're honest, to stay in the safety of the shore, this is a lesson that generally has to be learned through the faith-stretching realities of the storms of life. For some of us, 2025 has been a really hard year. We're almost at the end of it. In January, I preached on the stilling of the storm the week after Mark Beattie died and went home to be with Jesus. And for some of our church family this year, it was a case of greatest fears faced, wasn't it? And Jesus has shown and continues to show his power in holding on to some of us who would have otherwise sunk. And that is power that has to be proved in the midst of a storm. It's power that can't be known in the classroom. And in the midst of the storm, either we will allow disaster to swallow us, or we will allow a big view of Jesus to overwhelm them. The answer to the disciples' question is that Jesus is the creator God who made the sea, but who became man to enter into his fallen creation to save sinners helplessly sinking in our own sin. This is who he is. So we should fear Jesus. We should fear Jesus because he's greater than even your greatest fear. And fear of him can therefore displace every other fear. Fear of him is actually a safe place to be. It's a place of safety because he has the power to bring peace out of a great storm paired with the care that can bring about great calm. Stability through storms in the Christian life is often simply a case of switching the lens through which we look at our circumstances. We can look at our circumstances through the lens of fear, and we can say, look how big those bills are. Look how long that program is. Look how hard that court case will be. Look how messed up my marriage is. Look how frequently cancer returns. Look how big the high school seems next year. Look how many needs there are in this church. Look how many people there are to reach in Trinent. Or we can look through the lens of faith, which doesn't shrink the size of the storm, but instead sees the Savior and says, look how great Jesus is. Infinitely greater. Jesus is totally unique. He deserves our fear because he is the storm stiller, which drives us to trust him as the one who said in verse 25 to his disciples, let's go across to the other side. And by verse 1 of chapter 5, he safely brings them to the other side, just as he said. So, storm. Jesus is bigger than danger and disaster. Scene 2, Jesus is bigger than demonic darkness. And he delivers a lad called Legion next. So we're going to read chapter 5, verse 1. Let's read this together. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. And they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country. And people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed, and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he didn't permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled. Now here's a terrifying story, right? Here's a lad who lives in the darkness of tombs filled with bones and bodies. That's scary. Not just one demon possesses this man, but he says many. Now a legion was a group of 6,000 Roman soldiers. Now I'm not saying that he had 6,000 demons, but it seems to be that he has many, and the point is, legion is a lost cause. So verse 3, no one could bind him. Verse 4, no one could subdue him. Verse 5, night and day he cries out and he cuts himself with stones. Mark is describing to us someone who is beyond human help. Now there is real evil in this world. Some of us have known the nearness of demonic darkness. But Mark doesn't want us to get lost in the details of demons here. He wants us to see the unmatched authority of Jesus. And so falling down before him, the demons, interestingly, know the answer to the disciples' question, don't they? They fear Jesus. And the word of command from Jesus is enough to make them flee with his permission into the pigs. Jesus shows himself to be bigger than the dark oppression of many demons. He delivers the man. And what the demons then do to the pigs displays the darkness that the man was oppressed by and the desire of the demonic, which is to bring destruction and death. But having started out like something from a horror film, what's striking in this episode is that the people are interested in and fearful of not the man's demonic darkness, but verse 15. When they saw him sitting there, clothed, and in his right mind. Rescued from demon possession that nobody else could help him with, restored to sanity, just sitting there, dressed. And at the sight of his transformation, they were afraid. And they begged Jesus to go away. They were more comfortable with the demon-possessed man than they were with Jesus turning what they knew of the world upside down. So storm, scary. Demons, terrifying. Both situations beyond all human help. That's the point. But notice, the dominant fear in both of these passages is of the one with authority to deliver. There is no doubt that in this passage, Jesus is presenting to us, Mark is presenting to us a Jesus who is fearfully powerful. And what we do with that fear and how we respond to his authority is therefore fundamentally important. Either we follow him, like the disciples do, in awe of him that produces trust in us, or we flee from him, like the people of the Gerasenes, in dread that drives us away from him. Because we would rather live without his authority. Because here's the truth, if he is over the wind and the sea, and if he is over the powers of demons and darkness, then he is over me, and he is over you. Mark doesn't tell us these stories just to kind of amaze us and give us a good story to tell when we go home over lunch. He does it to confront us. When Jesus reveals his authority to us, we've got a choice. We either follow him or we flee from him. So, in habits that go against God's ways, will we follow or will we flee? In secrets that we've kept in the dark, will we follow or flee? In relationships that are unhealthy and unhelpful, in our finances and in our giving, in our grudges and in our bitterness, will we follow or will we flee? It's always a choice. And the beautiful thing in this scene, I love this. The beautiful thing in this scene is that while everybody else has tried to shackle this man, Jesus sets him free, and then all he wants to do is bind himself to Jesus and be with him. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. His newfound freedom leads him to desperately want to follow Jesus. So disaster, demons, maybe those things feel a wee bit far away today. I don't know. I'm not going out on a boat anytime soon. You might be. Maybe they feel far away to us. Here's scene 3, and I think this brings it closer to home for all of us in the room. Okay? Scene 3. Jesus is bigger than disease and death as he heals 2 daughters. Okay? I'm going to pick up at verse 21. I'm going to read this together. Verse 21. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be well and live." So there seems to be in this synagogue leader some sort of faith, doesn't there? He comes to Jesus. He seems to believe Jesus can deal with his wee daughter's disease. Verse 24. And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. So here is another humanly impossible problem. And it's a pitiful sight, isn't it? Verse 27. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I'll be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? And where faith at this point had brought Jairus to Jesus, it seems to be that fear at the seeming finality of death sets in, doesn't it? And you feel his pain here, don't you? Humanly speaking, it does not get any more helpless or hopeless than dead. Verse 36. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. And he put them all outside, and he took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha cumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. It's a showstopper, isn't it? Wow. It's an amazing story. A woman bleeding for 12 years. A 12-year-old wee girl dying, then dead. Now, 12 isn't that young, is it? So imagine that you had a bleed for longer than Leah and Antonio have been alive. That's a long time. And everything that she had tried had made it worse. And the people had taken all of her cash to boot. Now, some of you know that long-term illness is brutal. And all of us know that death is decisive. And yet Jesus brings healing by a touch, and he raises the little girl to life with a word. So Mark gives to us danger and demons and darkness and our close companions, disease and death, and shows us Jesus is over all of it. He is supreme. The woman fears Jesus in a way that brings her to him to receive healing from him. And Jesus says her trembling approach to him flows from faith. She is an example to us of honest desperation. She knows only Jesus can help me. Jairus trusts Jesus enough to come when his daughter is ill, but then he fears death more in a way that almost draws him away. Some of us have been there, haven't we? And is death not, in reality, where the rubber hits the road? Death. Through all of our many fears in life, and when we reach our inevitable end, where do we place our trust? For that greatest enemy and that greatest fear, where do we place our trust? Because death is something doctors can't deal with. Death is something that money can't get us out of. Death is something that technology can't undo. And what waits for us beyond death is judgment for our sins executed by the one who is even more powerful than death. And if we are trusting in our own sort of list of good deeds to get us through, then that is a fearful prospect. Jesus said, don't fear the one who is able to kill the body but who can't kill the soul. Rather, fear the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell. And yet what we see of Jesus here in these verses isn't just a Jesus with all power and authority, but a Jesus who uses that power to save, and a Jesus who uses that authority to deliver people who are helpless and hopeless. Think about it. The disciples are delivered from a hopeless storm. The man is delivered from legion, from helpless oppression. The woman is delivered from desperation. The girl is raised from death itself. And in the passage, Jesus is the same here as he is today. A Jesus with all power and all authority, but who exercises it for the sake of sinners helplessly in need of a Savior. This is the good news of the gospel. That Jesus is one who came for hopeless, hell-bound sinners like you and me. That the one who commands all of nature allowed himself to be nailed to a tree. That the one who sets legion free here allows himself to be bound and buried in a tomb. That the one who heals the woman bears our diseases and shed his own blood on the cross. That the one who raises Jairus' daughter dies to destroy the power of death itself, so that he might say to you today, do not fear, only believe. And if you're not a Christian today, then you should come trembling to Jesus and find that his greatness is matched by his gentleness, and that he alone can give you life that outlasts death. And if you are a Christian, Mark wants you to have a bigger view of Jesus. That's it. He wants you to have a bigger view of Jesus. Life is hard in all kinds of ways. There is lots that we could fear, and our fears could freeze us. And the answer to our fears is to be overwhelmed instead by him. I love the way that the passage ends. There's all these like little bits that we can miss. They're just throwaway comments Mark adds in. See the way the passage ends in verse 43? Jesus, he's just reversed the destructive power of death. Pretty amazing, I think. And then he tells them, give her something to eat. So caring, so gentle, so lowly. This is a Jesus who is fearfully trustworthy. And whatever your life looks like, and there's lots of different lives in this room, he calls you this morning to follow him in faith. I'm going to pray, and then we're going to sing again 2 songs.